In my opinion, the brief is the most important document in marketing, more important than analytics reports or your brand identity deck. Nothing is as important as the brief, and it's really easy to nail it if you understand the 4 steps I'm going to tell you about.
The best businesses are built on ideas that stand the test of time, fundamentals that help brands get noticed, remembered, and chosen. Welcome to the Evergreen Playbook. I am David Götz, a curious strategist, and together with experts from business, marketing, growth, and culture, we explore how these ideas work and how to implement them.
This episode of the Evergreen Playbook is supported by Creative Connection, a program by the city of Stuttgart. Stuttgart is the hidden champion of creative businesses. Every 10th company falls into that category. So next time you consider hiring a creative, consider Stuttgart.
Welcome to the Evergreen Playbook podcast. Today's special guest is Professor Dr. Sebastian Wolf of Stuttgart Media University. He is known for being a professor in advertising and strategic brand management. He's also a freelance creative director and strategy director and a consultant for brand strategy and creative advertising. Welcome to the show, Sebastian Wolf.
Thanks for having me.
So, I've heard that you are PhD of philosophy. How does that and all of your experience added together qualify you to talk about briefings?
My background in philosophy is quite useful to ask questions people may not ask when they're like in the trenches and in their everyday business. In philosophy, you don't take anything for granted, but you are skeptical and you question everything. And for example, you question the concept of briefs and of briefings. I just came to the question, what the hell is that even that we're doing here? What is it that we call briefing or brief? What's even the difference between the word brief and briefing? And so this critical thinking is one part of my training as a philosopher that helps here. But what's more important, I think, is my experience in creative agencies and also as a professor at the university. I've been working for more than 10 years as a copywriter and creative director in creative agencies. So I was receiving lots of briefs from clients and from strategists. And then I gave smaller briefs as a creative director to my creative teams. And in a sense, feedback and trip meetings are also some kind of debrief, rebrief, a brief. We'll talk about that. These kinds of situations all helped me to understand the concept of briefs. And after that, I became a professor and had the time to think through how briefs and briefings work even more. I had to teach it to my students because the basis of every great campaign is a great brief. So I have to explain to them how a great brief looks like. And that meant I had to think it through even more thoroughly.
You said that the brief is the most important document that you can produce if you want to start anything really in the context of marketing. Can you give that some more context?
There is some research on the importance of briefings and about the importance of communication in the process of creating advertising. That hasn't been by me, but by some other very intelligent people. It's called the Better Briefs Project. And through a questioning of different professionals in Australia, the UK, and the US, they found out that about 30% of marketing budgets are lost or burned because of bad briefs. And this is quite understandable if you've been in the trenches and you received briefings or had to give briefings, that they are often bad in different aspects. And because they are not ideal, people don't really know what the direction of the work should take, and what the problems are that the work is supposed to solve. The specifications of the ad creatives are maybe not even fixed, and that's why the strategy process is built into the actual creative process. You're doing more feedback rounds than necessary. It takes longer to actually deliver the work. You need more manpower. And that's why it's really business relevant to have great briefs and great briefings.
That's why it's also the perfect topic for this podcast, because in this podcast, I'm looking at ideas from people that help businesses do better marketing, do better business, and that aren't just made for days or for weeks or for months, but are made for years, for decades even. And I think everybody at some point in their life has to write a briefing or receive a briefing. And it's a very cool topic to talk about, because if we can improve there, if we can already reduce the inefficiencies in that process.
Absolutely. And even for those people who think they don't really have much to do with briefs or briefing because they're not a strategist or not a creative, you probably do, because you probably are in communicative situations in some project management role where you are actually briefing a person and you don't even know what you're doing.
So what is a briefing? What isn't a briefing? And what are the important aspects you have to consider to do it well?
Yeah, so the first step in this Evergreen Playbook, as you say, is you have to know what a briefing is when a briefing happens. And in my understanding, you are always briefing or you are being briefed when information is delivered from one party to another that is important for the receiving party to fulfill some kind of task. Okay, so it's always some kind of translation also from a more knowledgeable person, because she did some research, because she has some domain expertise, because she's working in a different company or in the client's company. She has more information and maybe also speaks a bit of a different language, different lingo, and she has to explain to someone else what needs to be done in the next step of the process of delivering advertising or communication or brand management. And this happens much more often than in meetings which are explicitly called briefing meetings, or in email transactions going back and forth where the header may say, this is the brief, and then some document is forwarded to another party. This happens much more often, maybe just through one line of email, through a phone call, a WhatsApp message, maybe even in the hallway of an agency where one person talks to another. All these situations where someone talks to somebody else to tell them this and that has to be done, and preferably in this kind of way, and until that deadline or so, that's basically a brief or a briefing situation, if you will.
So in summary, briefings are everywhere, and maybe even a colleague saying to you, oh, can you do this quickly, might be a briefing.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. If someone says, can you help me with that? I need this or that done. That's a briefing.
So why are we talking about this now? Why right now?
Well, it's high time to talk about it. It's actually quite surprising, in my opinion, that there is no definite process or model of how to brief well, of how to do great briefings. There isn't that one book you can rely on. There isn't that one template you just need to fill out. There's a lot of work to be done. The marketing discipline is, 60 years old in its mature form, but still the concept of the briefing hasn't really been tackled thoroughly, so that everyone knows that it's important and how it should be done. It's also quite a complex thing, to be honest, because communication and developing communication is a complex process. And that's also one reason why there is no one-size-fits-all brief or briefing that everyone can rely on. In my opinion, it's important to understand what the goals of a briefing meeting or briefing situation are. And if you understand that, that will make the briefing much better already.
What are the goals of a briefing meeting? Could you maybe list some?
Yeah, sure. Well, the most important thing is that everyone knows what to do. I would say the most important thing is to nail the basics, which are to make sure everyone knows what he has to do. And to make sure that this happens, the person who is delivering the briefing should answer 4 basic questions. That's a second step in this playbook. So the most basic questions of the brief are who, what, why, how, and when. So who should do what, why, how, and when. It's a little bit like those journalists' questions. Something happened, and journalists would ask, okay, what happened, who was involved, blah, blah, blah. And the first question, who, is not concerned with the target audience, to make that clear, because in a brief, you always talk about the target audience, who the product is for. That's not how this is meant in my playbook. But who is the briefing for? Who is the addressee of the brief itself? So is this the agency you are briefing? Is it a creative team inside the agency or some creative freelancer you may have to brief? Is it a media person? I mean, in our business, a creative agency works completely different than a media agency, and also need to write a media brief from time to time. Is it a hands-on executional person, for example, a programmer or a screen designer who has to have or who has to get other information than a creative director, for example, or an art director who needs a bigger picture, if you will. So if you answer to just finish the sentence, if you answer the question, who is the brief for, this determines what kind of brief you really have to create.
So you said that we have to answer who, what, why, and when. And who is really concerned with knowing who you're talking to, maybe even from the perspective of knowing the language you have to choose in order to deliver the briefing in a way that the person addressed can even receive it.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's also the translating part I was talking about, because if you're a corporate person and each day, the whole day, you're talking about money issues, about timings, about, I don't know, internal processes, this is all irrelevant to a creative team that you want to brief to come up with a campaign. Okay, what they need to know are completely different things, like who is our target audience, what's their problem. You really do have to switch the perspective 180 degrees to translate this corporate lingo, so to speak, into agency lingo and into the perspective of end consumers or end customers.
Although I'd argue that even for the creatives, it's important to understand the business case behind,
of course, yes,
what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That's, I mean, even though I say that templates are a bit overrated, I also do have templates and I use them, but I recommend that one uses them very skeptical and flexibly. But I always start with the business problem in every brief. And there are more complex brief templates for big campaigns or strategies or brand strategies, and for creative teams and creative directors. And there I even differentiate between the business problem, the marketing problem, and then the end consumer problem, which have to be solved in order to solve the higher order problem, if you will. But there's also a briefing template I have, which is very short. You can use that just to write an email, where you tell a screen designer, for example, what kinds of ad executions, what kinds of creatives you want to have delivered. And even there, the question of why are we doing that has to be answered. And sometimes it makes sense to even tell that person what the overarching business goal is, or the business context. Sometimes you don't really have to aim that high and just tell them it's this campaign, this campaign because you've been working on it for a couple of months. This is a creative that is supposed to drive sales, or that's supposed to build brand or something like that, just to give some context. But it's really important, of course.
Awesome. So we've gone through why the who is very important. What's the next step?
Yes. So the next is the what. So what's actually the deliverable that you want to see? Sometimes that's not fixed in the sense that you don't have a media plan with the creative formats you want to see in the end, because you are briefing to see a big idea. But of course, delivering a big idea or developing a big idea is also a deliverable, right? So it's always important to define what you want to see. Do you want to see scribbles? Do you want to see mock-ups? Do you want to see slogans or first thoughts? Is it a napkin meeting you are looking to have with the team? Or is it a full-fledged campaign with executions across all media channels with all the in all the right specifications and so on and so forth? Yes. So this is really important to define what the end result should be of this step in the process.
In your experience, how important is it to define the form of that end result? As in, should it be slides or should it be a presentation?
I think it's really important. Of course, in developing creative ideas, form and content go a bit hand in hand. So the creative team or whoever comes up with ideas or creatives want to have some wiggle room on how to deliver that. But there should be some kind of expectation management from the beginning on. So if you are the corporate client and you are briefing the creative team or a creative agency, you should at least define what kind of meeting you are expecting to be in at the end of this process and what kind of deliverable you want to see in the end. Is it a deck? Is it a Miro board? Is it a booklet or whatever? And as the party who is receiving the brief, you can, of course, from the outset or in the process, say something like, okay, are you flexible on that? Maybe we come up with a more interesting idea on how to show you our ideas. Maybe, I don't know, when you're doing event marketing, you maybe bring those persons to some space where you do projections to make the whole idea more tangible or more vivid. And then they might say, yeah, sure, surprise us. We're open to that. But you should start with something fixed and then talk about that.
So we've just talked about how important it is to define the what. Can you give an example from your experience and maybe talk about where that went wrong or went really well in the past?
Yeah, I think one example in strategy is the competitors analysis. When you're doing competitor analysis from a corporate perspective, the first things you want to know is the market share of the competitors. You want to know their product portfolio. You want to probably also know their CAGR, how they are growing through the last years. Are they growing or shrinking? Very basic business metrics. And when you are briefing a creative agency to come up with creative concepts or with a campaign and you tell them, I want to see a competitor analysis, they will deliver something completely different. They will look at, I don't know, if you're briefing a social media agency, they will only look at the social media content the competitors are doing. Maybe they will even look at the wrong competitors, small competitors who are doing interesting stuff on social media. And they may not even be clear on, are they looking at this stuff for inspiration or for benchmarking? They will just, gather all kinds of interesting stuff from competitors, so you get a better picture, and they themselves actually get a better picture of how the competitors are communicating. And if the expectation from the client is, tell me something about market sizes, market share sizes, they might be quite disappointed if you only show fanciful pictures, right? So that's one thing where you should be very clear what you mean as the deliverable that you're briefing.
So we've talked about the who and the what, and now the next question you teased is that as part of answering the most basic questions of the brief, you have to also answer the why. That sounds a lot like a Simon Sinek thing.
It does, but it doesn't really have to do anything with Simon Sinek. Forget Simon Sinek. He should be erased from marketing earth. He's done big harm to marketing with his golden circle. I think Mark Ritson said he's at least in his top 10 of marketing bullshit of all time. So, anyways, but as I said before, these W questions are also questions journalists always ask. So you can't get around them. They are much older than Simon Sinek. Anyway, so what's the why? The why is, why are we sitting here? Why are we doing this anyways? And oftentimes, especially when you are very tactical and the company is very tactical and just says, okay, we need a flyer, for example. We need some kind of brochure because every time this year, because there's some kind of fair we have to be at, we need some flyers or brochures. And then the creative team says, well, yeah, okay, what color, what format, and they do it. And that's not enough. You always have to ask, okay, why do you need that flyer? And to say, because we always do that every year, that's not a satisfying answer.
Same procedures, James.
Yeah, exactly. That's not enough. And so when we talk about why, we talk about objectives and goals. Why? What do you want to achieve with this initiative, with the outcome of this process we're starting together? And there are objectives of different order that you can differentiate a little bit. So at the lowest are things that happen directly in the end customers' minds or hearts, if you will. Things they should know after they get contact with the campaign, the things they should feel maybe, or the things they should do. But they are not necessarily business relevant in itself. For example, if you say, it's bad objective anyways, but if you say we want to increase engagement on social media, that's all right. That's an objective.
It is.
Then we know how we can optimize content for that objective. But then you should ask, okay, now let's look at the second order objective. Why do you want to increase engagement? And many clients don't have an answer in that particular context because they don't really know what engagement brings them.
Yeah, but
because it doesn't really bring much.
Yeah. What does that vanity metric mean?
Exactly. That's a vanity metric, as you say. He could even say something like, it makes me look good with my boss because he doesn't know about business metrics. And then you may say, all right, fair enough. So let's do it. But if you don't just want to please your client, but do actually good work, you would say, well, yeah, then maybe the first order objective isn't the right one. Maybe we should optimize for something different. And then you may say, we want to optimize for reach. We want to just have as many eyeballs as possible. And we want recall of the ads. We want that people remember the ad, that it really, that they burn themselves in the brains of people. So you can measure that. And then you have an objective that is significant for higher order objectives like sales volume, price perception, profitability, and so on and so forth. Or maybe a company value should also be considered. And if you flip the whole thing, you should always think, okay, our global objectives are profitability, market share, brand growth, and what are the relevant metrics that help us achieve that, and what are the relevant metrics for this communicative initiative to achieve those second order goals. And that's basically the why, the context you should always deliver in a brief.
So everything but Simon Sinek.
Yes.
Cool. So we've sorted out the who, the what, the why. Now comes the how, right?
Yes. So how basically means, how do you want the job done as the person briefing? It's setting some boundaries. For example, you want the creative to be well branded, and you probably have a design manual, some design guide for your brand, and you want the creative team to adhere to those rules. You don't want something that doesn't look like yourself. That's how you want the goals to be achieved. You also want to stay in some kind of budget. You have a budget for the production and for media, and that has to be taken into account when people develop creative ideas or creators. Even some more, some more implicit things can be important. For example, if the brand manager you're talking to knows that their boss doesn't like green, maybe you shouldn't come up with green. Or if there's a campaign, let's say a Christmas campaign that comes every year, and last year and the year before that, you always came up with, I don't know, a funny snowman. And this funny snowman has always been rejected. Then maybe just try something else this time. Okay? So these kinds of boundaries are important to explain how you want the job to be done.
That's something where I actually have developed a question that I always ask in briefings, and that's, have you done this before? Firstly, to find out whether people actually have the knowledge it takes to brief well, because in my experience, that has happened a lot, that people brief on things they don't even fully understand themselves. And secondly, if they have done it before, to get to the basics of the learning that they have had with this experience in order to learn from it and to avoid repeatable mistakes.
Yes, that's very smart. Especially both parts, but especially the second one. I mean, let's say we're living in a perfect world where everyone knows what they're doing. Even then, sometimes you start from scratch every time, even though there's so much knowledge somewhere buried, even easy to bring into the process if you just ask for it. And to build that into your briefing process, into your template, I think is really smart, so you don't do the same mistakes over and over again.
Also, on the positive flip side, marketers tend to not repeat campaigns at all. And science has proven that sometimes repeating a well-doing campaign can be the best choice. So maybe learning on the positive flip side from things that went really well and going, well, let's just change the end screen or change the story up a little bit and see how that does, might also be a good option, but it's one that's often not gone to.
Yes, exactly. I mean, most pitches for new business pitches are about show us how creative you are. And creative agencies feel the urge to always come up with something original and something new, even though they may say, well, it's actually not that bad what they're doing right now, the client. Their campaigns aren't that bad. Actually, there's nothing broken that should be fixed. But just to show them how creative they are, they come up with something completely new. And from a strategic point of view, that doesn't make sense at all. So it would make sense to also change briefs for pitches, for new business acquisitions from the agency side, and ask, do you really want to change something big? Do you really want to have something completely new? Or is it more about money this time and some small, refreshment of what you're doing already? So this is also something important in the how question, I think, that one should consider.
It's the last question.
Yeah, the last question is when. That's quite easy. You always have to have a timing and not just a date for the delivery of this deliverable, of the outcome of the step of the process, but also of the milestones or check-in meetings on the way. And this should be as clear as possible from the outset. For example, if you are delivering a medium-sized campaign, you may have a 3 to 4 months time window, but it wouldn't make sense to receive the brief and then meet the client 4 months later. I mean, some pitches, of course, work like that. That's also a big problem when it comes to pitches. But when you have when you're the agency of record and you already have a working relationship with the client, you should of course have check-in meetings on the way, test the strategic springboards, show some first ideas, then go back, show others, and always fix what deliverable should be presented in which form at which time. So that's the when question.
So a little bit of a sub-briefing for each appointment.
Yes, exactly. You would need one overarching brief because you want to explain what the end goal of the whole process is, of the project. And you need to fix what you want to see the next time you meet. And that's a good way of putting it. It's like a sub-brief for each meeting or for each check-in. Yeah.
That's super duper important because we're currently working with a pharmaceutical client and they have huge internal processes that have to go through. First, it has to go through a medical check. That's where the people that develop the actual medicines and supplements have to check that it's correct in the way that the supplement is meant to be communicated and actually functions within the body. And then afterwards, it also has to go to the legal department because they also have to check that it's all good. And afterwards, it has to go to the media to then see if it can even be distributed in that way or whether it has to go back to step one and we have to change something so it can then again be put through the whole process. So that timing, the whole when and considering that within it is super duper important.
Yes, of course. And sometimes clients forget that there are not only their processes and their loops of feedback, but of course also in an agency. And the bigger the client and the bigger the agency and the more complex the project, the longer these processes take. And sometimes a very simple ad, some one-page flyer may take a couple of weeks just because of the backgrounds.
In this Evergreen Playbook, we've looked at briefings. Briefings are super duper important, we learned, and you first have to realize that you're in a briefing at all and what a briefing even contains. The second step is to answer the most important questions of a briefing. That's who, in terms of understanding who you're talking to and how you have to address them. That's the what. That's what do you actually have to deliver, in which way, and that deliverable can be soft or can be super hard defined, but you have to understand what you're delivering and then why. What objective are you actually pursuing with that briefing? What's the end goal in mind? And how do you actually measure that end goal and how do you get to it? And there's different levels of order that you can address the briefing to. And you should always have the highest order in mind, though, when doing all of these steps. Then it's the how, and that's all about restrictions and guidelines and setting the guardrails so that things go in a way that is anticipated and making sure that it stays on brand, or how freely people can act within the boundaries of the brief. And lastly, it's all about the when. So it's all about making sure that timings and the process of getting to the end timing is well communicated and well planned out. Did I get that right?
Exactly. I couldn't have summarized that better.
Awesome. Hey guys, you're listening to the Evergreen Playbook. If you're enjoying this podcast, leave us some form of engagement, whatever platform you're on, a like, a comment, a follow, 5 stars. That would be awesome. Let's get to the next step though. What's the next big step after you figured out that you're in a briefing and the main questions of a briefing?
So until now, people may say, well, that's just semantics you're talking about. Why are you being so philosophical about what a brief is, what the communications situation is that you call brief when I'm writing an email, and that pseudo Simon Sinek questions, what's that all about? Just give me the fucking template and I'll fill it out and I'm done. And that's why my third step is don't just fill out a template. You have to think through what you want to communicate. Briefing and brief writing isn't as much writing as it is thinking and talking and communicating. So that basically refers back to what I said at the beginning. A briefing is a type of communication. It's an act of communication. You want to deliver some kind of information in a specific form, and the brief in terms of the document may sometimes or often help doing that. But quite often, a very good briefing can be delivered without a document, without a brief, without a sheet of paper, without a presentation, just by explaining somebody what goals are, what needs to be done, what the outcomes should be, when and for how much money all that should be realized. So people, in my opinion, focus too much on the document, the brief, and too little on the briefing, the communication itself.
So you're saying that a briefing shouldn't be thought of as a document, but more should be thought of as a concept. You said philosophical as a word.
Yes, as a concept, if you're in front of a judge, for example, okay, you've got a parking ticket and now you have to pay a fine or get into jail or whatever, you may walk into that house of law and stand before the judge and don't even know what kind of communicative situation that is. You may say to the judge, "Hey, buddy, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes that I don't park my car correctly. What the fuck, here are 50 quid, so let's not talk about that anymore." And that's not the right mode to talk in that situation. You have to understand what the situation is to understand in which mode you should be talking. And the same goes for briefings. If you understand that you are in a situation where you want to deliver, communicate information so that some task gets done, you have to understand that you have to answer these questions we talked about and that you have to be very clear on their questions. And the goal for you is not to just get a job done in the sense of giving a brief or pushing a task from client side to agency side. That's not the job done. The job done is when the agency people understand what they are supposed to do. And just filling out a template, like doing painting by numbers, most of the time doesn't get that job done.
In my experience, templates can be very badly done as well because they're copied together from different templates from previous engagements. And then the aspects aren't, as you said, thought through as a whole, but rather an inconsistent mess of individually okay bits that don't give a whole.
Yes. That, I mean, there are many things people are doing wrong when they use brief templates. I think copy pasting things is one of the major issues. I would really, really recommend never to do that. I mean, that's just the mechanical process. Don't use Apple C, Apple V, and Apple C. Don't just do that. Even if you have an older brief and you think the target audience, for example, is the same or the objective is the same, type it yourself. Even if you just copy what is in the other document. But type it yourself, because while you are doing that, you're still thinking it through a little bit. You're trying to, or you will be automatically feel if it fits to the other aspects of the brief, like the product you're trying to sell, its benefits, its reasons to believe, the competitive environment. And if you just click some shortcuts, you don't really think through what is in the brief. It will be a worse brief than when you really type everything yourself.
There's beauty in reduction, right? So I think it was Goethe who said, I'm sorry this is such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing also goes for briefings. If you just copy paste, you don't reduce it to the main ideas that you want to get across, and then people are confused.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the etymology of the whole concept. The brief should be brief. Yeah, and this is also a challenge for most junior people on especially client side, but also in agencies. You have to make decisions to keep a brief, to reduce it to the most essential elements, because you have to make up your mind and make a decision on what you think is important and what not. Feels like the safer route to just put in many things, because then everything was thought of. You didn't do anything wrong if all the product features are in the brief. But the problem is that the people who are receiving the brief are overwhelmed with information, and what's really important will be overlooked, or they will deliver a idea or a solution based on the wrong aspect of the brief. And that's why you are completely correct. A brief, as you said in the beginning, the brief is the starting point of a process. You know, a task should be fulfilled, a solution should be developed, but it's also the end point of a strategic process. That's also one reason why filling out a template can't be understood like painting by numbers. You have to think through what the strategy is, and the essence of that strategy should go into the brief. And that's also not an easy task. That's also why brief writing shouldn't be given to junior brand managers or junior project managers in agencies. I think you need some experience and some strategic thinking to really write good briefs. And even if, and that's a general point about brief writing and about briefing, it may seem like a higher investment at that point, because the hourly price for a senior person is higher than for a junior person, but you get a much higher profitability in the end, because you will need fewer feedback rounds, you will be faster in getting the job done, and all this investment up front will you will get it back tenfold at least, or at least threefold, let's say, in the end. So it really makes sense to have that those senior people really think through and then deliver that brief.
So you're basically saying that the experience of a senior is worth something in the world of briefing, because they actually have the understanding it takes to brief well, because they have the understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah, and because I guess they feel secure enough to make that hard decisions of what is important and what not. And you can't really expect a junior person to make those calls.
What is the actual hardest part of doing good briefings?
I think it's what we talked about, to be very concise and to be focused. Many people are too afraid to really define what's essential, what's really important and what not. The most common problem, I think, in advertising is that you want to put too many messages into your creative. You just have to walk around the streets and look at some out-of-home ads, much too much copy on them in many cases, because people think something has to be explained, and many different features have to be mentioned, because all of them seem similarly important, but that makes the ad less effective, because people can't take in so much information. And the reason why we see so much bad advertising that's overwhelming with messages is because the briefs probably already weren't that good. Because in the brief, everything was written down, what you can say about the product. And people thought, okay, then we have to put everything we can say about the product in the ad. And that makes bad advertising. So that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, to make the decision on what's important and what is not.
Do you think it's an emotional issue because people are afraid of doing something wrong if they leave things out?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That's also, it has to do with the client agency relationship when we talk about the prototypical situation of briefings. When the agency, or it's really natural that the client gives a brief with too much information. Then it's the task of the agency to condense that into the essentials, into something a creative team can work with, so that great advertising comes out of it. And of course, if the creative agency does a rebrief and says, okay, you have some kind of electric pot that can also stir things and whatnot, and has multifunctional, but we focus on just one of those features, the client may say, yeah, but what about blah, blah, blah. It costs the company so much money to develop this innovation. I have product managers and people in product management who spend so much time doing that. They are so proud of that product. They want that to be in the brief. And then, of course, you need the experience to really say, yeah, we understand all that, but we can't communicate that. We would have to do 10 campaigns to deliver 10 product features. Because if we have 10 in one ad, it becomes a bad ad. That's why we decided to do the brief this way. And if you are seen as a competent partner, the client should say, okay, we understand that.
So it takes a lot of emotional sturdiness to accept that you can't communicate everything, and also that you have to take responsibility for making a decision on what you want to communicate. And that you can't change the goalpost later on, because that's something that happens quite a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's basically two things. The first thing is the creative agency should be responsible for nailing the briefing, the creative brief, which means they have to consolidate it, they have to make it brief, they have to make it single-minded so that it is clear what should be communicated content-wise, what the core message is. And that should be, in most cases, it should be just one. And this message is connected to some kind of goal or objective that the communication should achieve for the company. And that should be defined from the outset, maybe even in a broad way, like we want to have more sales. In contrast, for example, to we want to have more likability or whatever. But when you get to the final presentation with your campaign, and I don't know, the chief marketing officer or the CEO sees the whole concept for the first time, and he says, yeah, where's the call to action when you're doing a brand campaign? Then he's moving the goalposts, because suddenly he wants to have immediate conversions, and that was not what was written in the brief in the beginning. So you should really be clear on, okay, this is what we want to achieve. And this is also what we measure the quality of our work against when we're done doing that. And that's also, that's the why we talked about earlier, the why of the brief. Why are we doing that? And if you can nail the why, you can also, I think, move as a creative agency from hourly billing to value-based pricing, because you have a conversation with the client on why we are doing this project. It's not just to create a flyer with, 1,000 issues and to reach a couple of people, but really to move the needle business-wise, to make some sales, to get some leads which are worth a couple of $1,000 or whatever. And then you can say, okay, what is it worth to you that we are doing that? Because you want to achieve this business goal. And then don't you think it's fair that we get a share of what this is worth to you? And probably the client would say, yeah, well, actually, you're right. If I think I can make, I don't know, 100,000 in profit through this initiative, maybe it's fair that you get 10,000.
Finishing off this section where we talked about seeing briefing not as a template, but as a thinking process, and about a thinking process where you actually have to commit to aspects and really make sure you understand them and reduce them to the maximum. What is something that you wish a CMO had tattooed on their forehead every time when it comes to briefings?
Yeah, I mean, when they come to judge the creative or the concept, always ask, what was the brief? I mean, really, tattoo that on your forearm, because then you can see it. What was the brief? This is exactly what we said earlier. Don't change the goalposts. Don't just react with your gut to some creative. Always have in mind, what was the task at hand, what was the problem we wanted to solve for, and judge the creative or the concept or whatever based on that. And that's in the brief. And if it hasn't been in the brief was bad from the outset. So you can throw the whole campaign in the bin and start from scratch again and try to fix the brief first and then start the whole process again.
It's something I've run into quite a lot of times where the client requested something afterwards that wasn't in the brief, or said, oh, but we wanted it this way. Well, it wasn't in the brief. So I absolutely agree with tattooing that onto every marketing manager's forearm, not even just the CMO, because it's something from an agency perspective that you deal with a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we've covered 4 steps: realizing you're in the briefing, answering the most important questions, and not seeing it as a template, but as a thinking exercise. What's the last and final step of this briefing playbook that you thought of?
Yeah, this is a very general question that's a little bit similar to, we have to just think it through, what kind of briefing you are writing. But I think it's a very important and therefore separate point. Do you want to inspire or do you want to set boundaries? Colleague of us, Weiber Matisone, she has the differentiation of springboards as a concept versus briefs, I think, is how she calls it. And a springboard is supposed to inspire a creative team, and a basic brief is just there to deliver information that sets boundaries, like what's the target audience we're talking to, what are the brand guidelines we have to adhere to, and so on and so forth. And I think both kinds of briefs are relevant and are absolutely okay. It just depends on the setup you find yourself in. I'm a strategist more than a creative now, but I used to be a creative for many years. And from that perspective, I'd say I don't need a strategist to be creative. Sorry, I'm creative myself, and most great creatives are also creative in a strategic way. They come up with their single-minded propositions, with their springboards, with their insights, especially with deep human insights themselves. They don't really need that in the brief. They just want to know, what's the deliverable? When do you want it? What's the scale we can think in? What's the budget? Can we have Beyonce or some nano influencer, or what are the boundaries? Who are we talking to? And what's the fucking product we want to sell? So that's it. And they feel a little bit like you're stepping on their toes if you are trying to put the big idea in the form of a single-minded proposition or a springboard into the brief already. But in another setup, that might be exactly your role. Maybe you have a setup where the creative department is much more execution, like designers. And when you're in design agency, the designers and the art directors maybe don't have such a strong strategic thinking, not such a strong conceptual thinking, not that marketing background with them, but are very, very good in their craft. And for them, it may be very helpful if you already come with some kind of almost concept or almost big idea. what you could call single-minded proposition or insight or whatever. And in this kind of setup, it may make total sense to be more inspiring with your brief. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It comes back to the question of who you're addressing and with what goal, but in a combination. So who you're addressing with what goal in mind, and obviously also with the constraints. So the how is in there as well. So yeah, I see why you made it a separate point, because it's overarching to the whole second section in a way. You have to know what you're even aiming for on a larger scale and what the person on the other end can deliver for you.
Yeah. And it's also a bit what kind of strategist you want to be. In a perfect world, there would be the job description of a creative strategist, of a brand planner in creative agencies, and he or she would be the person writing the briefs, right, and delivering briefings. And even if that job would be universally understood and accepted, which is not the case, by the way, but let's just assume that, it would still be an open question if you are one that should inspire or wants to inspire and can do it, or if you are more on the, let's say, research and analytics side, and you just are very good in consolidating data into the language of a creative team, right? And this way setting boundaries. And so it's not just a question of who are you talking to in a specific situation, but also what kind of strategist do I want to be? Yeah. So it's like a life decision, a professional life decision, if you will. Are you someone who is strategist and creative, or someone who is more quantitative, very analytics focused, and can explain data in a good way? And then you may have to find the right setup for your type of personality. That's why I found it's a separate point, because it's so important.
There's one thing you want people to take away from our podcast session here. What would it be?
One takeaway. Think it, don't write it. Think the brief. It's really the essence of a strategy, and not just some document you can push from one side to another. You have to think it through, make up your mind what you want to communicate. And this happens more often than you think that you are briefing. And so you have to be thinking more often than you think, so to speak.
That's a lot of thinking.
No, I'm a philosopher by training, so I kind of I think it's important to be thinking.
Good way to think. All right, let's summarize what we've learned so far. In this podcast, how to brief better. And we've got 4 steps to go along with that. The first thing is realizing you're in a briefing at all. Most people don't realize that often enough, and therefore miss opportunities to brief. The second step is to answer the most important questions of the brief, which is the who, what, why, how, and when of the briefing. But there's a twist to it. You might not understand all of the aspects without listening. The second to last step is not filling out a template, but understanding that a briefing is a thinking process. And the last aspect is to think about the brief on a meta level, to think about whether you want to inspire or whether you want to set boundaries within the briefing, and what the overarching goal with the person or the people you're addressing is, and what they can deliver for you. So if there's one step that a listener can take within the next 24 hours to do better briefings, what should they do, or what action can people take to maybe learn the process of writing better briefings?
I think the most important and easiest thing to do is train to be sensitive about when you are in a briefing. So, for example, think about the last 1 or 2 of your work days. And when you're in the communications sector, think a bit hard about your emails, about your conversations, about your meetings, and try to remember if there may have been a situation where information was delivered so that somebody could fulfill a task. And if that was explicitly called a briefing or not. And I bet that you find at least one situation where a briefing happened without it being called this way. And if you have that kind of perspective on your day-to-day business, you already made the first step. And the second would be to think about, well, was that the best way this conversation could have happened, or could it have been optimized? And it probably could have been better if people would have asked those important questions beforehand. What was supposed to be done? When was it supposed to be delivered? How were the boundaries set up? And who were actually the people that were briefed in that situation? And from that on, you can talk. You can do some research on different templates, on the different aspects you need to answer those important questions. But that's not even that important. The most important thing is to have the perspective. Briefings are more common than you think, and you need those basic questions answered to deliver the important information in a sensible way.
One spontaneous question that just came into my mind was, what is the role of the rebriefing within a briefing?
Yeah. In a perfect world, you wouldn't need that because the client already understands the language of the agency or of a creative department, but that's usually not the case. So the rebrief's role is to check if the translation from one party to another actually worked. So when you are on the client side, you have corporate language in your mouth, you have corporate mental models in your head, and somehow that defines how you write a brief, how you deliver your briefing. And the agency then has to understand and translate those concepts, those words into their own words so that they can speak in their own language. And they basically play it back. They echo it to the client again in their language and explain what they mean with their words and their concepts so that they have a common understanding of what's supposed to be done. And that's, for me, the role of the rebrief. Basically, understanding we do understand our different languages, so to speak, and what happens as a kind of effect through this process is that the creative agency consolidates the information from the client, because usually the client briefs a final outcome and may have all the information that's relevant on the way to this final outcome. So it could be that in the brief, the agency brief, the specifications of the specific ads are already determined, and the, I don't know, creative springboard maybe. But for the first step in the process of delivering the advertisement, the specifications of the ads aren't important. So to get the creative team that's supposed to come up with the concept on track, you can leave all that detailed information out for that moment. And that's also one important aspect of the rebrief, to tell the client, we have that information, we know it's important at a later stage, but for now, this is the brief we will give our creative team. So that's the role of the rebrief in my understanding.
So in an ideal world, we wouldn't need it, but because we aren't in an ideal world, it's a useful tool to check if the understanding is the same of the task at hand, and to reduce where reduction hasn't happened yet.
Exactly. Yeah, those two roles are most important for the rebriefs.
Awesome. Now that we're coming to the end of our podcast, I have a few more questions. The first one is, where can people learn more about briefings? I'm sure you've sparked their interest now in reducing inefficiencies. Which resources can you recommend?
There are some books, most of them are bad, but I would recommend two books by Howard Ibeck. English books, very short ones. I think the first one is called How to Write Single-Minded Propositions, and the other one is How to Write Creative Briefs, something like that. He's also teaching brief writing in the US for the AMA, a very good guy to follow. That's the first one. The second one is Baiba Matisone. She's quite active on LinkedIn. Guess some of the listeners do know her. And she has compiled a very huge library of brief templates, which are very useful as inspiration. She also worked together with Howard to add to their respective brief libraries. They both have a lot of examples of templates and also of actual client briefs. It's very useful for learning. And the Better Briefs project that's done by two strategists they're working in Australia now. They have a website, Better Briefs Project. They did this study I mentioned earlier, and they also set up a guide on how to brief a creative agency together with Mark Ritson. That's published on the IPA site, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising in the UK. That's also a useful resource. And Julian Cole is a person, also a trainer, if you will, with his strategy finishing school. His academy is called, I think. And he's really reducing briefs on the basics. He uses this get who to buy template where you basically get the essence of the strategy into a briefing form. And that's also somebody I would recommend checking out on briefs.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all these resources. Now, I've been very humble and not mentioned anything that you do. Is there anything people can come to you with if they have questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm at the Hochschule der Medien, University of Applied Sciences in Stuttgart. You can find me there, and we can do cooperation projects. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you need one-to-one guidance or want to talk about something, you can just direct mail me there. I also set up a website for this topic. It's called meisterbriefing.de. It's in German, but of course you can translate it if you want to, where I explain a little bit also what kind of different briefings different stakeholder groups need. I mean, you need a different briefing for a freelancer, for a creative agency. You need a different or you need different briefings when you're a strategist in an agency or a brand manager at client side. That's what I explain there. I have a blog there where I explain a little bit about the basics of brief writing. So that's also a resource people can have a look at.
Go check out Professor Dr. Sebastian Wolf's website, Meister Briefing. Anyways, is there any question that I haven't asked yet? Any topic I haven't mentioned or anything that you still want to talk about?
Just one more thing. I think people underinvest in briefings. People underinvest when it comes to money. They don't want to pay people. They don't want to pay for the time people have to invest to write good briefings. And people underinvest their thinking. They are doing it too quick or too superficially. And I think one reason is that you don't have a strong KPI to measure whether a brief is good or not. And that's why I would also recommend to introduce some kind of key performance indicator, whether your briefs are good or not. Maybe even qualitatively. Ask your agency when you're on client side, how do you like our briefs? Do it anonymously. That's important because otherwise they don't tell you the truth. And if they aren't happy, you really have to put in more work to deliver better briefs. Another way to measure that is just ask people, even inside your agency or inside your organization, how much do you agree to the statement, I always know what I'm doing? Because quite often, and I've seen that in surveys on employees, very often people don't really know what they're doing. And that's most of the time, I think, because they haven't been briefed well. So if that internal process measure, I don't really know what I'm doing, isn't satisfying, you have to work on your briefs.
With that, thank you, Professor Dr. Sebastian Wolf, for being on the podcast and sharing your Evergreen Playbook on briefing with us.
Thanks for having me. It was great.